Good morning, everybody. Hope you're having a great week so far. So welcome back. Grab a cup of Joe, and here we go. So it's curious. I was just reflecting as the timer ticked down on the fact that, this book, this first book in this 5-volume set is about God. It's been almost a week of reading. It's been 3 days. Well, so today's the 4th, and we haven't actually started talking about God yet. One of the things I love about St. Thomas is everything is so well ordered. So first he talks about, what is wisdom? It's knowing God. Okay. And then, there's also stuff that we can't know about him because he exceeds our capacity to understand, right? Otherwise, what kind of a God would it be if we could understand him perfectly? So there's truths about God we can't get at naturally. Okay, so it's reasonable that there are some things revealed. Is it reasonable? And then today, he's going to kind of dig in a little bit more about, okay, well, what about, does it make sense that things that we can access with our reason, that we can figure out ourselves, like that Aristotle figured out, for example, is it reasonable that some of that would also be revealed and proposed to men for belief, he says? Yeah. And he'll explain why he believes so. And then he proceeds from there, and he continues to proceed on okay, well, what can we know about God? And why should we believe anybody, anything, any revelation, all that stuff? So it's pretty cool how he's building up and justifying almost. He's like, this is why we're going to talk about things in the way we're going to talk about them. And it's not unreasonable. It's actually appropriate, right? So it's kind of fun. But next week, towards the middle end of next week, is where we start to actually talk about God and the attributes of God and what we can know from reason, etc. So it's pretty cool. But we're laying foundations. So chapter 4, that the truth about God to which natural reason reaches is fittingly proposed to men for belief. Since, therefore, there exists a twofold truth concerning the divine being, one to which the inquiry of reason can reach, the other which surpasses the whole ability of human reason, it is fitting that both of these truths be proposed to man divinely for belief. This point must first be shown concerning the truth that is open to the inquiry of reason. Otherwise, it might perhaps seem to someone that since a truth can be known by reason, it was uselessly given to men through a supernatural inspiration as an object of belief. Yet if this truth were left solely as a matter of inquiry for human reason, 3 awkward consequences would follow. That translation of the Latin is funny. That's not, so he says inconveniencia is the word. Inconvenient. It's inconvenient. It's uncomfortable, right? But translated here is awkward, which I find entertaining. The first is that few men would possess the knowledge of God, for there are 3 reasons why most men are cut off. For there are 3 reasons why most men are cut off from the fruit of diligent inquiry, which is the discovery of truth. Some do not have the physical disposition for such work. As a result, there are many who are naturally not fitted to pursue knowledge, and so however much they've tried, they would be unable to reach the highest level of human knowledge, which consists in knowing God. Others are cut off from pursuing this truth by necessity imposed upon them by their daily lives. For some men must devote themselves to taking care of temporal matters. Such men would not be able to give so much time to the leisure of contemplative inquiry as to reach the highest peak at which human investigation can arrive, namely the knowledge of God. Finally, there are some who are cut off by indolence, or laziness, you could say. In order to know the things of God that reason can investigate concerning God, a knowledge of many things must already be possessed. For almost all of philosophy is directed toward the knowledge of God. And that is why metaphysics, which deals with divine things, is the last part of philosophy to be learned. This means that we are able to arrive at the inquiry concerning the aforementioned truth only on the basis of a great deal of labor spent in study. Now, those who wish to undergo such labor for the mere love of knowledge are few, even though God has inserted into the minds of men a natural appetite for knowledge. The second inconveniencia, the second awkward effect, is that those who would come to discover the above-mentioned truth would barely reach it after a great deal of time. The reasons are several. There is the profundity of this truth, which the human intellect is made capable of grasping by natural inquiry only after a long training. Then there are many things that must be presupposed, as we have said. There is also the fact that in youth, when the soul is swayed by the various movements of the passions, it is not a suitable state for the knowledge of such lofty truth. On the contrary, one becomes wise and knowing in repose, as it is said in the Physics by Aristotle. The result is this. If the only way open to us for the knowledge of God were solely that of reason, the human race would remain in the blackest shadows of ignorance. For then the knowledge of God, which especially renders men perfect and good, would come to be possessed by only a few. And these few would require a great deal of time to reach it. The third awkward effect is this. The investigation of the human reason, for the most part, has falsity present within it. And this is due partly to the weakness of our intellect in judgment and partly to the admixture of images. The result is that many, remaining ignorant of the power of demonstration, would hold in doubt those things that have been most truly demonstrated. This would be particularly the case since they see that among those who are reputed to be wise, each one teaches his own brand of doctrine. Therefore, with the many truths that are demonstrated, there sometimes is mingled something that is false, which is not demonstrated, but rather asserted on the basis of some probable or sophistical argument, which yet has the credit of being a demonstration. That is why it was necessary that the unshakable certitude and pure truth concerning divine things should be presented to men by way of faith. Beneficially, therefore, did the divine mercy provide that it should instruct us to hold by faith even those truths that the human reason is able to investigate. In this way, all men would easily be able to have a share in the knowledge of God, and this without uncertainty and error. Hence it is written, quote, "Henceforward you walk not as also the Gentiles walk, in the vanity of their minds, having their understanding darkened." That's from Ephesians. And again, quote, "All thy children shall be taught of the Lord." Okay, so this is really interesting. Amy, welcome. Good to see you. Interesting, it's called the knowledge. I always thought it's not the brain that connects one with God, but the heart. So God is an intellectual being, right? So the heart, I think, draws us to him and conforms us to him, makes us like him in a way. But we understand, since he is pure intellect, we are kind of brought more into union with him by our intellect. That our happiness lies in the fulfillment of, or in becoming wise, and growing in knowledge of God and the first cause of things. Okay, but so going back to this for a second, and then I'll get to your second question there, Amy, your second comment. So what's interesting here is he's like, okay, well, yeah, when it comes to the reason of the higher causes and like the more complex, more subtle notions of philosophy, only few men over a great amount of time with a great admixture of error would arrive at the truth. In fact, one of the things I love about Aristotle and his story is that he tutored and advised none other than Alexander the Great, who, as he traveled around the world conquering everything, would send specimens of the wildlife or of the plant life back to Aristotle for Aristotle to do his little, like, to examine and ponder. Oh, well, why is it that these animals from this other region of the world look so different? Why do they have these different capacities? Why do they have these different features? So he had the benefit that a lot of philosophers at the time didn't have, which was a much more universal or worldwide perspective on creation, which is cool. But it's interesting. And what he said here, the last point about there being a great admixture of error, is really interesting, because actually it was tradition back then. You weren't even considered an apprentice to a philosopher until you were 40. And then you could start your apprenticeship under a philosopher. And the reason for that is because they believed that younger men, like younger than 40, tend to rely too much on their imagination rather than just reasoning itself directly. So it's interesting that he cautions, and he kind of remarks that that's part of why it's fitting that men would it would be revealed to men knowledge that is accessible to reason. So to answer your question here, but what is faith? So we'll get to that. This is what's cool is he's clearly building, right? So he's like, okay, well, it makes sense that somebody, just like we teach a child, right? He doesn't use this example, but just like, a person with a lot of life experience will teach and guide a child, and that child can learn from the experience of that adult. Similarly, if you remember from the first couple chapters, when he talked about the knowledge, how there's gradation in intellects. So there's some people that are smarter and have a deeper understanding of things than others. And so it makes sense for those more intelligent people to teach and inform. So the lower intelligent, but also the lower intelligent, it would be folly, he says in there, it would be folly for them to reject the opinions of the wise about truth. If they couldn't understand it, to reject it just because they couldn't understand it. But then anyway, so then he kind of talks about then angels have more knowledge naturally, higher capacity for knowledge naturally than we do. And then all the more so God. So what he's asking here, so I wouldn't necessarily see, here's the thing, Amy. I think a lot of times today we have faith. This idea of faith is corrupted. It's kind of muddled with so many other things, because when we talk about faith today, oftentimes it's like, okay, well, I have to believe in somebody just because they have authority. Well, that's been kind of ruined for us, in our post-COVID era, right? Because there was a lot of authorities that steered us wrong, right? But then also moving forward, or just looking more broadly, there are a lot of faith leaders that have steered us poorly as people over the decades, um, over the millennia, but especially recently, it seems. So I, I would encourage. Um, okay, so the rest of your question is, to me, it was something you feel despite what the brain is telling you. So I don't know. I think this is one of the things he'll get to in a little bit here, is that the truths of the faith are actually, or the truths that are revealed must be in line with, and if they are truly from God, then they're perfectly in line with the truths of reason. So the truths of faith will never actually contradict the truths accessible to reason, which is really important, and that's a really good litmus test, if you will. You know, um, like if you're told to drink Kool-Aid and suicide yourself, right? Then obviously that faith that you have in that cult or group or whatever your source of proposed truths proposed for belief isn't the right one, right? To put it, but all that to be said, or all that to say. But so what's beautiful is, before we even get to a discussion on, I think it's chapter 9 is where he actually says, okay, well, is God simple? Is God one? Let me see, what's the first? Okay, so chapter 9. So a week from today, we'll read about the order of procedure in the work. So leading up till, so for the next several days, we'll be looking more at what kinds of truths does it make sense that it's revealed, and then we'll be like, well, isn't it foolishness even to believe something that we can't understand ourselves? Is that foolish? Is it even reasonable? Because it has to be reasonable if we're talking about the faith being in line with reason, or assenting to, or believing, I should say, revealed truths. If it's reasonable to believe, if it's reasonable that they're revealed, the other side of that is that it's reasonable also to believe. So it's reasonable to put your belief in something, even if you can't understand it, is the point. And he kind of underlines that that's not folly. That's not unreasonable to do. But then, of course, you don't just believe anybody who says they have a message from God, right? So I'm sure we'll get to that as well. Yeah, and actually, Amy, we should talk about this for hours. Not today, obviously, but yeah, I'd love to talk about this and related topics. So we should, if you guys have missed it, actually, I'm referring to the Philosopher King podcast. We should do that. But yesterday evening on the Philosopher King podcast, make sure you guys check it out. I had a good friend of mine, Dominic, who has a really beautiful perspective on Scripture and how the Old Testament parallels the New Testament, and it's really, really cool. So I definitely encourage you guys to check out his stuff and check out yesterday's Philosopher King episode. It's really beautiful. So yeah, so I think it's gonna be neat. It's interesting, too, how he's like, when he taught at the beginning of this chapter specifically, he's like, okay, well, not everybody has the capacity to reflect on these higher truths, and but it's not just a capacity of like intellectual capacity. Some people don't have the time, and some people don't have the temperament, right? So it's beautiful, because he's not just like, oh, well, there's some people who are just too stupid to recognize the truth. No, he's like, no, our situations in life are different. And he actually mentions in there that Aristotle, the philosopher, as he calls him, refers to the philosophy as a life of leisure. And if you think about it, we're very blessed. Back in the day, so to speak, even just 100 years ago, perhaps, we wouldn't have this time together, because we would be up at the crack of dawn taking care of the animals. Like, it's just we have technology, and now with working remote, we have this opportunity that's been afforded to us to live a piece of that life of leisure that was reserved almost exclusively for philosophers back in the day, when the toil of daily life was more arduous. But so something to be thankful for, something to really appreciate. And I think I don't appreciate it enough. I think I could do well, and I think perhaps we could all do better to appreciate how leisurely, from historically speaking, especially, the fact that so many Netflix hours are watched a day, in the average American household. I think it's really, we live a very leisurely life. I think when you look at the history of the world, even if we have a 40-hour-a-week work situation, so something to be thankful for. But any other questions or comments before we start to wrap up this beautiful Cup of Jonah session? So tomorrow, while I'm waiting for any other questions or thoughts to come through, tomorrow. So today we asked about whether or not it's appropriate that truths that are accessible to reason are proposed to men for belief. Tomorrow it will be, are truths that human reason is not able to investigate, are those also fittingly proposed to man for belief? And then chapter 6 is, it's not foolish, is it? To assent or to give your belief to something that's beyond our capacity. That's not foolish, is it? So it's kind of cool. He's like laying down the groundwork and justifying the conversations that will follow. He's providing the framework and the groundwork, like as in on Being in Essence, Amy, that book I mentioned a few days ago, that little work by Thomas. That again, that first line is, a small error in the beginning will lead to great errors in the end. And so what he's doing now is he's making sure that we have the right perspective and understanding about the different truths that we'll be pondering over the coming chapters. So, all right, well, have a wonderful rest of your day, folks, and thanks for joining me for Cup of Jonah. Don't forget, check out the Philosopher King podcast episode yesterday evening with Dominic. And then also check out phoneboothpodcast.substack.com for all the other podcasts there. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks for tuning in to Cup of Jonah.